Where are we? Well, we started Chronicles, First and Second Chronicles, and so tonight we're going to finish it. Now, we're going to start with this, and I forgot the pointer Dave gave me. I was going to bring it tonight, but anyhow, we're going to start here. This is a chart that I made, and I keep it with me when I read the Bible. This is of the books of the Old Testament. If you look in the index in your Bible, it would start with Genesis, and the Old Testament would end with Malachi. And what happens is the first 5 books are the law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then come the books of history: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, time of the Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, the judges to the monarchy, 1st and 2nd Kings, the kings of Israel and Judah, the divided kingdom, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, sort of a recap. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, books written during the captivity and the time of the restoration, the return of the Israelites from captivity to the promised land. So this is the timeline of the Old Testament. Next, the books of poetry follow, and after the books of poetry, the prophets follow. But I've moved poetry up here and the prophets down here so that I've put some letters here that correspond with letters here. And I put some numbers here that correspond with numbers here. So you can see that the Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes and Proverbs were all written in the time covered by 2nd Chronicles. It helps you see where these things fit in when you're reading them. But anyway, this part of the history is called the Deuteronomic history. It was written finished being written around the time that the Jews went into captivity. And it's the story of how we got where we are. It talks about God and God's covenant and how the people of Israel disobeyed God's covenant. They weren't faithful. And what happened was God did like he promised. He promised them, if you don't obey me, I will curse you. And that's exactly what happened. But then 1st and 2nd Chronicles are written at the end of the captivity, around the time that they were getting ready to come back. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. It's not just a recap. 2nd Samuel corresponds mostly to 1st Chronicles, and 1st and 2nd Kings corresponds mostly to 2nd Chronicles, okay? Just so you know, I put that in there just so you know it, because when you read 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you're going to say to yourself, it seems like I just read this. And that's because a lot of 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings are repeated in Chronicles, sometimes almost verbatim. And that's because they use the same sources. Okay, so it was some people think it was put together by Ezra. It could have been. But it was certainly during his lifetime, around the time that Israel got permission to return from captivity and come back and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, the house of God. So use similar sources to Samuel and Kings, and there's many parallel passages. And in the Septuagint, that was the first translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek. In the Septuagint, the title of the book is The Things Omitted. And there are different things in Chronicles. There's a lot of genealogies and lists. It's one of those boring books that you have to kind of plow through. There's a lot of lists and a lot of names. But the reason these things were important is because they wanted to show the community of the Jews that they had a continuity with the past. They were still the children of the promise. The orders and the courses of the priests and the Levites that David had set up still existed. The descendants of those people were still with them. And now they are ready to resume legitimate worship in the promised land. So it's a connection with the past. Hey, these people are still here. They're still with us. We're still the children of the promise, and now we're going back. We're going to try it again. The legacy of the house of David. Okay, most important thing was the temple and its service. This is like Moses. One of the most important legacies of Moses was the tabernacle and its service. Both Moses and David got the plans for these things directly from God. So great attention is paid in Chronicles to David and Solomon and the preparation for and building of the temple, much more than in Kings. Details are included of the ordering of the functions of the priests and the Levites, who was going to sing and who was going to watch the doors. And this is hard to slog through some of it, but there is actually, the more you read it, the more you start putting things together and noticing some things. Well, anyway, David and Solomon are idealized in Chronicles. Now, their story is told in Kings, but it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay? Their accounts of their reigns have been kind of what we call today sanitized. Well, what do you mean? Well, there's no record of David's adultery with Bathsheba. There's no record of him having Uriah the Hittite killed. There's no record of Absalom's rebellion. There's no record of the problems that Solomon had, the opposition that came from Adonijah when it was time for him to take the throne. And there's no record of the bloodletting, the revenge that was taken by Solomon after the death of David. All that's been omitted, okay? But they had a profound and lasting influence, and this is the point that the chronicler is trying to make. It talks about all Israel. For many, many, many years before the captivities, it was a divided kingdom. After the death of Solomon and the time of Solomon's son, Rehoboam, because of Solomon's idolatry, God tore the kingdom in half. He left the southern kingdom of Judah underneath the descendants of David because God had promised David always to give him a man to sit on the throne. But the rest of the tribes founded the nation of Israel. So it was a divided kingdom for many, many years. But now the chronicler talks about all Israel again. During the reigns of Rehoboam, that was Solomon's son, Asa, Hezekiah, and Josiah, those were all kings of Judah, there was an influx of citizens from the tribes that comprised the northern kingdom of Israel into the southern kingdom of Judah. Sometimes they wanted to go because they wanted to worship God the way they used to, the way he was supposed to be worshiped. And in the northern kingdom of Israel, they had a different religion now. They had the cult of the calves. Their priests were not Levites. Also, there must have been refugees from Israel proper and Transjordan, Gilead. Now, I wanted to put a map in here, but I forgot. But Israel is kind of rectangular. It looks like a rectangle set up vertically like this. And the Jordan River forms the east boundary, and the Mediterranean Sea forms the west boundary. Well, across the Jordan River, there were 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And in the days of Moses, they had asked Moses, they said, this is a land for cattle, and we have cattle. God gave that land into their hands. They conquered Og, king of Bashan, and Sihon, king of the Amorites. And they took all this territory, and they said, we want this territory. So Moses actually gave them territory on that side of the River Jordan. That was called Transjordan, which means across Jordan, or else Gilead. But they were the first to go into captivity. And when they did, and when Israel was taken into captivity later, there must have been a lot of people that crossed the river or ran south to get away from it all. So they were refugees. There were 2 deportations of Israel. That was the northern kingdom. The first one was Transjordan in the days of Menahem, king of Israel. The God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away, even the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he relocated them. Okay? Now, that was the first time. Israel was pretty much cut in half territory-wise, and they were deported. Then, in the days of Hoshea, king of Israel, because the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did, that was the cult of the calves, they departed not from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. That was the last final captivity. The land of Israel was cleared out. There were 3 deportations in Judah. That was the southern kingdom. The first was in the days of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. And this is when Jeremiah began to prophesy. In Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, it says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes. So, what happened? Jehoiakim had rebelled against the Assyrians. He was a vassal nation. They'd been reduced to being a territory of the Assyrians by that time. Okay, so he rebelled. Nebuchadnezzar came and took hostages. That's what they did back then. They took hostages. They took the children of important people back with them so that everybody would be good and obey the rules. Daniel went with them in this captivity. But Jehoiakim would rule for 8 more years. And during that time, he rebelled again. And so his son, Jehoiachin, only reigned for 3 months. When Jehoiakim died and Jehoiachin came to the throne, the king of Babylon was already on his way. And when he came to Jerusalem and besieged it, Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out. He surrendered to the king of Babylon. He, his mother, his servants, his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. That was the king of Babylon's reign. It was the 11th year, well, the 3rd month of Jehoiachin. And his father Jehoiakim had died after 11 years. And he carried away all Jerusalem and all the princes and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin's uncle, Zedekiah, and made him king. That's what they would do. When they got fed up with somebody, they would depose them and put their own king in there. This is a person we can deal with, right? So that's how Zedekiah, and he was the king that gave Jeremiah all the problems. So that was the second deportation. Now he took the cream of the crop and left the poorest sort of the people of the land. But in the days of Zedekiah, now the rest of the people that were left in the city and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. When Zedekiah rebelled, that was the 3rd time, Nebuchadnezzar came, destroyed Jerusalem, burnt the temple, and took everybody. There was just a few people left in the land, and they eventually took Jeremiah and fled to Egypt. So the land was cleared out, both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And Jeremiah had prophesied that it was going to be 70 years that they were going to spend in captivity. The 70 years began to run when Jeconiah, the seed of David, was taken captive. So, and in I think it's the 22nd chapter of Jeremiah, God says this about Jehoiakim, the first king that rebelled when Daniel was taken away. He says this, he says, he shall be buried with the burial of an ass. Wow. First Chronicles, I got this out of order here. There, further details in Chronicles. When you're reading Chronicles, you'll notice a lot. The more you read it, the more you read the Bible, the more you'll notice. That's all I can say. I do not study the Bible. I mean, I study a little bit to put this stuff together, but mostly I just read it, and I read it again, and I read it again, and again, and again, and again. And you could read the Bible the very first time and see something that I have never seen. I've read the Bible over 30 times since I retired. Okay, and I read it a lot of times when I was in church before that. But anyway, I still see things every time that I never saw before. That's how it is, and God speaks to everybody differently. So, you don't need to be a Bible scholar. You just need to faithfully and daily read the Bible. Amen. God will make sure you learn what you need, what he wants you to know. Well, in First Chronicles, mostly in First Chronicles, notice some things like David used to always talk about the sons of Zeruiah. You sons of Zeruiah, be too hard for me. That was his favorite lament, that you give me all these problems. Who were Zeruiah and Abigail? They were David's sisters. Okay, and Joab, Abishai, and Amasa, and Asahel too, but he didn't figure too much, were the sons of Zeruiah and Abigail. So there was a lot of nepotism in the court of the kings. All their relatives were officers. Okay, but these head of the army was David's nephews. First Chronicles chapter 4 has a prayer of Jabez. That's a very famous prayer. A lot of people, they frame it and put it in their house. First Chronicles 6 talks about the lineage of Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. This is important. We'll talk about it in a minute. First Chronicles chapter 10 talks about the kindness of the men of Jabesh Gilead. You remember it said that after Saul and Jonathan, his sons, were killed, that the men of Jabesh Gilead rose up and went all night and took their bodies down from the wall and buried them. Remember that? Well, maybe you didn't read that and you can't remember it. But anyway, that's what happened. Why did they do that? Because when Saul first became king, you remember the Ammonites threatened the men of Jabesh Gilead and said, come out and surrender to us, and we're going to put out all your right eyes as a reproach on Israel. And they said, we'll come out to you tomorrow if we can find no one to save us. And that Saul cut oxen into pieces and sent them throughout all Israel and says, the man that doesn't come with me to this battle, this is what's going to happen to his oxen. And that was Saul's first victory. It cemented his kingship. And the men of Jabesh Gilead never forgot. They never forgot what Saul did for them. First Chronicles chapter 13, we learn that the ark was not inquired at in the days of Saul. And again, that's what kind of a king he was. It was not inquired at in the days of Saul. What happened in the days when Samuel was just a little boy? Part of the judgment on the house of Eli, we're going to talk about that, was that Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were going to be killed. And they had gone to the battle with the Philistines and carried the ark with them. So they were killed and the ark was captured. It was in the land of the Philistines for some 6-8 months. Okay? Then the Philistines sent it back to Israel. They sent it back. And for a long time, while Samuel grew to be a young man and a prophet, and while Saul became king, all that time, the ark of God was in Kirjath-Jearim, I believe. And it was not consulted. It was not a part of what was going on. And it was David, all the way till the time of David, after Samuel's entire life, Saul's kingdom, okay, when David finally became king of all Israel. That was 7 years he'd been king in Hebron. So this is all the time that the ark of God has been gone outside the capital, David tried to bring it up, and he did it wrong the first time. He used a new cart instead of having the Levites carry it on their shoulders. And so it abode at the house of Obed-Edom for another 3 months, I think, before David tried again. So a long time Israel was without the ark. We learned some new details in Chronicles about some of the kings. Asa, we hear some bad stuff about him. Asa was considered one of the good kings in Kings. He was one of the better kings. But we learn in Chronicles that in the last part of his life, he got mad at a prophet because he prophesied against him and rebuked him. And we learned that he imprisoned the prophet and that he oppressed some of the people at the same time. And it says that he was diseased in his feet, but he sought not to God, but to the physicians. We learned that Ahaz was the worst. The chroniclers considered Ahaz the height of the apostasy of the kingdom of Judah. There's a scripture that says that the more God punished him, the more he messed up. And it says, this is that King Ahaz. And every time I read that, I chuckle. Talk about bad. Give an example of some of the things he did that were so terrible. And says, this is that King Ahaz. That's just the kind of a guy he was. So Manasseh. Why do they go over Manasseh and spend time on him? Because in Chronicles, we learn, in Kings, we just heard that he was the worst and that God would not forgive the things that he did. It was during the reign of Manasseh that God vowed, made up his mind that these people are going into captivity. But We learn in the Chronicles that Manasseh was actually taken captive by the king of Babylon back to Babylon for a while, where he repented and he prayed to God, and God restored him to his kingdom, and he became a reformer. He ordered all the people to serve the God of Israel. We never heard that before about Manasseh. But see, the reason that information is in there, because he's presented as a type of the children of Israel. They disobeyed God. They were sent to Babylon, where they repented, and now they're coming back with a new attitude. The rise of the house of Zadok. Now, I put that in there because, well, you'll see why. In 1 Chronicles chapter 6, we see their lineage. Aaron had 4 sons, Nadab and Abihu, who were killed in the book of Numbers because they offered strange fire before the Lord, leaving him with 2 remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. Zadok was a descendant of Eleazar, and Abiathar was a descendant of Ithamar. But in between those people were 2 fellas. One was called Phinehas. He was in the line in between Eleazar and Zadok, and the other one was Eli in the line of Ithamar before Abiathar. In 1 Chronicles 15, Zadok and Abiathar are mentioned together as high priests. Now, this was never done before. There was always a high priest, right? The next high priest was a descendant of that high priest. But here we find 2 high priests together. How did this happen? First, we have to talk about Phinehas. God made a promise to Phinehas. When the children of Israel were led astray by the Moabites in the matter of Peor, according to the counsel of the prophet Balaam, that they had called to curse the Israelites. Well, there was a man, a prince of the children of Israel, that brought a Moabitish princess back to the camp into his tent while the people were weeping in front of the tabernacle. And it said that Phinehas grabbed a spear and went into the tent and ran them both through, the man and the woman through their belly. So they weren't playing cards. But anyway, because of that, this is what God said. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consumed not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made an atonement for the children of Israel. That's what God promised to Phinehas, and God does not forget a promise. However, the other guy that was in the other line, Eli, God cursed his house. He was the one that had the sons that misbehaved while Samuel was growing up in the house of the Lord. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house. And I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in my heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. Who was his anointed? David, and the seed of David. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a piece of bread. Amen. They could never approach to the altar, never ever again. But they could be in a priest's office, so that they could live off of the tabernacle. They could watch the doors, or they could be over some of the taking care of the vessels of the Lord or something, or boiling for the sacrifices for the people. But God was through with the house of Eli. Now, Saul executes the judgment on the house of Eli. Saul executed God's judgment. What happened was David had gone to the priests while he was fleeing from Saul and asked the priests for help, and they gave him help. They didn't know what was going on. They just inquired of God for him and gave him Goliath's sword because he asked for a weapon. Goliath's sword was there wrapped up in a cloth. So Saul heard about it. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse, that's David, coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. That was the high priest, Ahimelech. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him victuals and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king, that's Saul, sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came all of them to the king. And the king said to Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests and slew on that day 85 persons that did wear a linen ephod. That was the priest's outfit. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, oxen, asses, and sheep, with the edge of the sword. Wiped him out. Wiped him out. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, that's of the house of Eli, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests. That's how Abiathar came to be with David. Abiathar served David as his priest the whole time that David was in the hold, running from Saul, hiding from Saul. The whole time that David ruled in Hebron for 7 years after Saul's death, Abiathar was David's high priest, serving with him. So you had this dual priesthood. Zadok, Saul still needed a high priest. You know, remember, Jerusalem is in the tribe of Benjamin, and Saul was a Benjamite. So the city and the temple were still in Saul's kingdom, even while David reigned in Hebron. So Zadok was promoted under Saul to be a new high priest. Abiathar served with David. Zadok served Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, after Saul's death, while David reigned over Judah in Hebron. That was 7 further years. Both were kept when David became king over all Israel. He hung on to Abiathar because Abiathar had been faithful to him all the time he had been in trouble, been in the hold, running from Saul. And he hung on to Zadok because he was a high priest too. He hung on to both of them. So that's how, for this period of time, you had 2 high priests in the kingdom of Israel. Abiathar was later deposed by Solomon for his role in Adonijah's attempt to usurp the throne. Abiathar did not follow after Absalom in his rebellion, David's first son. But Adonijah, the third son, he followed after him. He conspired with him. And so Solomon put him from the priesthood. That was the end of the house of Eli. After that, they had to beg for a job. Zadok and his line were left to walk before my anointed forever. Zadok is the anointed priest. The line of Zadok is God's chosen line, just like David was God's chosen line. And this is how it all happened. When you get to read in the book of Ezekiel, you'll come up against Zadok all the time and how God talks about he was faithful to me at the time when all the other Levites went astray. So Zadok is very important, just like to the priesthood, like David is important to the kingdom. Next, we talk about Ezra. Now, that's one of the most boring books in the Bible, but I tried to make it somewhat interesting. Okay, you know, the reason I'm doing this is because Brother Roger told me, he said, brother, you need to go through and you need